On today's Locked On Bucks, we sift through another disastrous fourth quarter as the Bucks drop game one of the 5-game West Coast road trip to the undermanned Golden State Warriors. What went wrong and how did the Bucks fix it? We dig into it after this.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Bucks. I'm Justin Garcia, joined as always by Camille Davis. We thank you for making this your first listen of the day and for subscribing to and checking out the Locked On Bucks newsletter. If you have not done so yet, you can still sign up for free at lockedondaily.com and get your day started with that all-new free Locked On Bucks newsletter. Today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Download the app and use the code LOCKEDONNBA to get $50 instantly when you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game. Camille, everything we said you can't do, the Bucks did.
Mm-hmm.
And you start a 5-game road trip with a loss. It's getting increasingly difficult to not get last season vibes, especially with this 5-game road trip and the way that began under Doc Rivers. But it's really just been this common refrain of, hey, this offense just is nowhere near good enough, which I frankly cannot believe we are still saying this deep into the season for a team that has Giannis and Damian Lillard.
It continues to be, in my opinion, a lot of it is execution. Like they're not executing at a high level at all. They're executing at a level that you would assume from a team that maybe just started playing together. Like I know there are new pieces along the way here with Kyle Kuzma, with Kevin Porter Jr. Sims is no longer in the rotation, but we're talking about offense. Sims' name wouldn't come up in the conversation anyway. So I can't even put like, oh, well, they're down Sims here at this point too. So it affects the rotation. Like, no, even when you're just seeing the guys who have been on this team the entire year, they're not executing well. They're not executing properly. They're not playing with the right pace. They're coming into games playing way too casual. They're like jogging through the motions. And we've had the conversation so many times before. You have to play with a certain pace. Like against the Thunder, one of the things that Joe Prunty had mentioned during the halftime interview was like the ball has to move faster than the rotations. Like it just has to. And that is not something that they've been able to do in these games that they've been losing against better defenses, especially if they're switching. And now that teams are playing off of Kuz when putting their big over there and just trying to mess up the spacing, the Bucks themselves aren't doing a good job of keeping proper spacing. It's just like a lot of execution things where it's like, it's disappointing to still see this at this point in the season.
Yeah. And I mean, there was one sequence specifically in the fourth quarter last night where I think it was just the 3-point game shortly before the Warriors delivered the knockout punch, where you could see a visibly frustrated Giannis trying to direct to Taurean Prince to get out of the corner and move. I mean, we heard Doc Rivers after the game. I should say, if you heard Doc Rivers after the game, he said, we're just in an offensive funk right now. We got to work ourselves through it. On the one hand, I mean, I don't know how much this is just isolation heavy offense. I know Doc has spoken out about that quite a bit and said that's when we really get into our funks. But you do have to question, like at some point, when that starts to sift in. And again, anytime you see a poor offensive performance for the Bucks, go back and listen to the post game, and Doc Rivers is going to talk about, we stopped moving the ball and it was ISO ball. It just starts to become a second nature the more it happens of, well, I'm going to watch these two guys go to work. And that's the challenge that the Bucks are currently in and have to get out of, because we've seen, I wanted to save it, but let's just get into it now. We're starting to see some very consistent things here for the Bucks. Teams, not quite as much as we saw it last year, but it's popping up more, are starting to pressure Damian Lillard even further back than midcourt. And once he crosses midcourt, we're seeing more and more where you put two bodies on him and just trap him and get the ball out of his hands. We saw a lot of this with the Thunder. You started to see a ton of it from the Warriors, where defenses are also just sagging into the paint and saying, if Giannis is going to score, Giannis is going to score in the trees. That's fine. But we'll live with Taurean Prince and Kyle Kuzma and all the other guys, and even AJ Green. Like, we'll live with all these guys taking shots. We just don't want it to be Giannis and Damian Lillard. And how the Bucks fix that, I mean, it's everything you mentioned about, look, there can't be any stagnant offense, but unfortunately, you also just have to hit shots.
That too.
You know, the crazy part is when you look at the splits for pre and post, like, if you asked me as a whole and individually, how are the Bucks performing since the All-Star break offensively? They're shooters. I would have told you, I would guess it's like a 10 percentage point drop off. Not the case. Like, last night, I dug through catch and shoot, open looks, individuals. What are they shooting from three since the All-Star break? And it's pretty consistent, which I guess just means it stands out more because it's bigger moments when these guys are missing shots.
Yeah, the moments matter. The moments definitely matter. And I will say this too, because I like to give credit to the other team when it's due. And I thought that Draymond Green had a fantastic defensive game in this one. He put a lot of pressure on Giannis. He kind of took that matchup one-on-one, and then they were able to shade a lot with the other big, like, post dropping off from Kuz and just making life difficult for Giannis, because you mentioned just how the numbers seem to be the same for a lot of the catch and shoot numbers, a lot of the other guys, but what did Giannis go? 5 for 16 in this game? A very uncharacteristic Giannis performance in this game. 5 of 16. You had Dame, who was 6 of 18 in this game. And the way that this team is constructed, it's going to be very difficult for the Bucks to win a game if Giannis and Dame aren't looking like Giannis and Dame. And I thought the Warriors did a really good job of frustrating Giannis at times. And Giannis also just missed some shots that we've seen him make in the past as well. So to your point, like, you got to make some shots. Like, you have to make them. I mean, in the first quarter, like, that stretch there where it was just kind of like, you're getting some open looks. They're just not falling. Second quarter, same, where it was like, they're just not falling for you. And you got to make something happen along the way. But I think the way that teams are starting to play the Bucks, one, we had the common refrain from, what was it, the Thunder, the Magic, and the Cavs, of these teams are just being more physical than the Bucks. They're setting the tone. They're coming out. They're making their presence felt. And that's something that Doc has wanted this Bucks team to be. Be the more physical team. That's why you're leaning into being a big team, a jumbo team with Kuz out there, with Giannis out there. Of course, now, you know, without Bobby and without Sims, you have two of your front court rotation out. But you still can throw out some size with Brook and with Giannis and with Kuz, and they play Taurean Prince at the 2. Like, they can be a big team, but they haven't been a physical team. They haven't set the tone there. So it's disappointing, like I said before, to see it at this point, but the Bucks have to start solving some of the problems that have been consistent. What do you do? What is the action when Dame is being pressed? Like, he mentioned, that's part of why he liked sharing the court with Kevin Porter Jr., because he knew, hey, there's another ball handler here. He can bring the ball up. I can save some energy, and y'all can catch me on the second or third action along the way. But how realistic is it, you know, for Kevin Porter Jr. to be in the game at all times? And if he's not, then who is that secondary ball handler that you're looking to help relieve that pressure when Dame is being trapped that way?
Yeah, there's a couple of more takeaways from this Warriors game, and really the 4 minutes that decided this game I want to get to coming up after the break here on Locked On Bucks. Well, time to talk to you now about our friends over at Prize Picks. Basketball season's heating up. There's no better way to get in on the action than with Prize Picks, the best place for daily fantasy sports. With Prize Picks, you pick just more or less than on at least 2 player projections for a shot to win up to 1,000 times your cash. It's easy to use, available in over 30 states, and lets you mix and match projections across different sports. Building lineups is easy. You can select Giannis for more than 25 points or Jason Tatum for more than 8 rebounds. And Prize Picks makes it simple, where you can set your lineup in less than 60 seconds and stay engaged all game long. When you win, your money hits your account in as little as 15 minutes. No waiting around. And every Tuesday, Prize Picks offers select discounts on player projections up to 25%. giving even more value to your lineup. Download the app today and use the code LOCKEDONNBA to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That is code LOCKEDONNBA for $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game. When it comes to grocery shopping and meal planning, we've all had this ongoing problem. You just don't have the time. Between work life and trying to eat healthier, you're constantly feeling stressed out. You go to the grocery store, you buy things you don't need, and then end up with no time to actually cook them. Sticking to your health goals is a constant struggle as well. But everything changes when you discover Hungry Root. It'll be a game changer. It's the easiest way to eat healthy without all the stress. And with Hungry Root, it's like having a personal shopper and a nutritionist all in one. They take care of your grocery shopping, recommending meals and groceries based on your tastes and health goals, from anti-inflammatory to high protein and gluten-free options. The best part, every meal is ready in 15 minutes or less. Healthy meals done quickly that actually taste great, all delivered directly to your door. It'll be a huge time saver and make healthy eating so much simpler. You're going to love Hungry Root. For a limited time, get 40% off your first box and a free item in every box for life. Just go to hungryroot.com/LockedOnNBA and use the code LockedOnNBA. That is hungryroot.com/LockedOnNBA. Code LockedOnNBA to score 40% off your first box and a free item of your choice for life. hungryroot.com/LockedOnNBA. Code LockedOnNBA. Don't miss out. So this game, Camille, was, it was what, a 4-minute stretch that basically decided this game. You fell down by 17 and fought and clawed back to take the lead, your first of the game, and you started to feel pretty good about, okay, they're gonna win this game now, and they've pieced it together. The offense is starting to look better. And then that last minute of the third quarter happens, where it's 76-70. The Warriors go on an 8-0 run and take a 2-point lead into the fourth quarter. But to me, the last second of the fourth quarter was where you started to get the pit in your of the third quarters, where you started to get that pit in your stomach of when Jimmy Butler got that 3-point foul call on the closeout by AJ Green. He did get his elbow. Was there minimal contact? Was there enough to really impact the shot? It didn't look like it, but there was contact. And when that play happened, you started to feel like they grabbed the momentum back, and now you're going to be in for it in a dogfight. To compound things, the next 3 minutes of the fourth quarter, you go scoreless, and the Warriors go on another 8-0 run. So over a 4-minute stretch, a 16-0 run by the Warriors to jump back in front by double digits. It was over after that.
Couldn't agree more. And again, if I want to give the Bucks credit for anything after a game like this, where it's like, man, we stayed up for this. It's this team doesn't have quit in them. Like, even if they're down, like they don't quit. And there is something to that. What they were able to do in the third quarter when they were able to make their run, a lot of Warriors turnovers. They were really active defensively. They were a bit sharper on the rotations, which we can talk about their defense after this, because execution again lacking on that side of the ball. But you work so hard to get back into the game, and then you're up by 6 with like 40 something seconds left. AJ Green had the turnover. Buddy Hield takes it the other way, hits a 3, and then it just continues. Then you get the Kyle Kuzma shooting foul, and Kuminga knocks down both free throws. Then AJ Green fouls Jimmy Butler on the 3, and then he makes the 3 free throws. And to your point, it just set the tone in the quarter, where it was like, man, this was a great third quarter until the last 45 seconds of it, and it rolled over. Like, that momentum felt like it shifted. The Warriors continued to roll, as you said, came out in the fourth with that 8-0 run, and it felt like the Bucks just could not catch back up at that point. And then when it was close again, at the end of the game, another 4-minute stretch here where they just don't score. Like, the score just gets stuck on 93, and the execution down the stretch just was not good enough. You saw them trying to get into a lot more Giannis actions down the stretch there for them to take it home, and it just didn't work. You mentioned the play where Taurean Prince is in the corner. Again, the pacing, how they're playing, like they're not playing with the right pace. It's all too slow. And it just, again, they have to clean it up. And after the game, that was one of the most frustrated, it sounded to me like Doc Rivers was. Like, he didn't even, like, he was like, we got things to work on. Like, you could see the frustration building in him. And I get it, because after every loss, it feels like the same conversation of execution, ball sticking. But down the stretch, when you're supposed to lean on, your two superstars, even that execution didn't go as well as you would hope that it would.
Yeah, I forget what the question was, and there was that sequence too. It was funny listening to Doc last night, because it was a visibly frustrated Doc, and there was that portion. What was it? The second quarter too, where the Bucks opened up with 4 guys on the floor, and you had to scramble to get a 5th out there. It just was one thing after another. But there's a couple of things that really stood out to me. They played small at times, and get used to it, right? Like we talked about Jericho Sims being out. Bobby still has 10 games left on that suspension. The one thing I'm not too clear on, Doc was asked before the game by Jim Ozarski about, hey, can you move Bobby Portis to the suspended list and sign a 10-day? And Doc said, well, we already can. Like, we have the option to sign a 10-day, which I was trying to dig into the CBA and see, how did you get an exception because Bobby's suspended? Last I checked, there's also no suspended list where that would buy you the extra roster spot. So I guess TBD on that, but Doc Rivers said before the game they can sign a 10-day player. I mean, people have tossed out, hey, get Moses Brown, and look how effective he was against you and what he did for the Mavs. You know what? Honestly, fine. Like, the Bucks need any big body that they can get go forward here. And it's not, as you hear, like, what about Pete Nance or what about Tyler Smith? Like, these are games you need to win. That's not where you throw these guys in, especially Tyler Smith that you're developing. So I don't anticipate that. It's just like, you got 2 bigs, and you got that for at least 10 more games. We saw more of Giannis at the 5. It's such a small sample size that it's not even worth digging into how did the numbers look when Giannis was at the 5. But there's a couple other numbers that stood out. Offensive rebounding rate, the Bucks just don't do that. They get back in transition defense, or try to, but they had an 8% offensive rebounding rate in this game last night, which, look, you can be last. You can't post single-digit offensive rebounding rate. That means the Warriors were getting 92% of the Bucks misses in this game. So you're shooting yourself in the foot there. Bucks did a good job of protecting the ball. They forced turnovers from the Warriors and scored points off of those turnovers. But the Warriors crashed the glass. The Warriors barely outshot them. And that, to me, the rebounding, when you're playing small, I know it's a big task, and I know you're giving up a lot of size advantage, but you have to be cognizant of your lanes and box out, because I can't tell you how many times with the small lineup, and you knew this is going to be an issue, and it continued to be an issue, where Jonathan Kuminga, just a clear path to the lane, swoops in and gets an offensive rebound. If it wasn't Kuminga, it was Brandon Pajemski or Gary Payton II. You name it. The Warriors were just destroying the Bucks on the glass. And when you're shooting 39%, you can't lose that battle too.
It's very true. It's very true. And before the Kuz acquisition, like, that was part of the dilemma with the Giannis at 5 lineups, where it was like the rebounding around him was just not good. And we saw what it looked like for the Bucks when they only had 2 bigs, when Bobby was away from the team after his grandmother passed away. And it was like, man, the rebounding is really suffering. They missed Bobby Portis out here tonight. And I think it was the putback with Kuminga where he got the putback dunk. I think it was Kuminga. Yep. And it was shortly after Brook Lopez had checked back into the game after Giannis was so big out there. And defensively, like, they were looking pretty good. And then Giannis checks out, Brook comes back in, And look, Brook didn't have a great game defensively in this one, but I'm not trying to say that. But
Camille, you know what you're doing.
yeah. But here's the thing, like, he can't box everyone out. Like, it's on the other players to box out. And I think it was that Kaminga dunk putback where Brook is down there boxing someone out, and you see everyone else just standing and watching the ball. And the putback happens, and it's like, well, it's hard to play small if the smalls around the big aren't executing the fundamental of putting your body on somebody and boxing out. And that's the frustrating part for me about this Bucks team. It's execution, it's fundamentals. Like, you have to do the little things, box out, stop ball watching so much, know where your man is. Like, we didn't even get to them on defense, which a lot of times in this game, it was just like too much ball watching, too slow on the rotations, not understanding who's supposed to X out where. Like, it was just a bunch of mistakes. And you're like, how are we still making these mistakes at this point of the year? Because we already know it's a lot harder to offensively to keep going if you continually are taking the ball out of the basket. Like, if the other team keeps scoring and you have to continuously be in half court sets, it's going to be a bit more difficult. I think that's in part why they were able to make that run in the third, because they were getting stops, they were getting turnovers, they were able to get on the run and get some easy buckets. And you have to get as many easy buckets as you can along the way. And this Bucks team just seems to make it like they're just making it a lot more difficult on themselves than they have to be if they could just execute the fundamental stuff properly.
A couple of things I do want to dig into, because look, we started this show talking about the offense, and the offense was still the issue in this game tonight. Like, I think the consistent theme we've seen throughout the season is your defense has been good enough. Even when we can pick apart and say, man, you did a bad job of boxing out here and giving up offensive rebounds, or you were loose with rotations, or you didn't know who was taking what. And we saw a couple of times too where I think it was Giannis and Taurean Prince, where one guy thinks they're switching, the other's like, no, we're not switching. And Taurean Prince has to slide over and take someone. For all of that, your defense still has remained good enough. You gave up 104 points in this game. It's consistently in the top 10. Like, that should be more than fine when you have Giannis and Damian Lillard on your team. So I do want to dig into the offense and the same old discussion of whether or not this is, hey, we just have to reevaluate who is starting these games for the Bucks. We'll get into that conversation next. Well, Robinhood Gold means you can now enjoy the VIP treatment, receiving a 3% IRA match on retirement contributions. The privileges of the very privileged are no longer exclusive. With Robinhood Gold, your annual IRA contributions are boosted by 3%, plus you also get 4% APY on your cash and non-retirement accounts. That's over 8% the national savings average. The perks of the high net worth are now available for any net worth. The new gold standard is here with Robinhood Gold. To receive your 3% boost on annual IRA contributions, sign up at Robinhood.com/gold. Investing involves risk, rate subject to change. 3% match requires Robinhood Gold at $5 a month for 1 year from first match. Must keep funds in IRA for 5 years. Go to Robinhood.com/boost. Over 8 times the national average savings account interest rate claim is based on data from the FDIC as of November 18, 2024. Robinhood Financial LLC, member SIPC. Gold membership is offered by Robinhood Gold LLC.
The NCAA tournament is here, and so is the Bracket Breakdown.
Locked On Podcast Network and Amazon Fire TV channels are teaming up to deliver NCAA tournament coverage like never before. Watch studio shows featuring former players and Locked On's local experts as they guide you through every upset, buzzer beater, and bracket matchup.
Stream it all for free on Amazon Fire TV channel. Search Bracket Breakdown to see it all for free.
It's your team every day.
So the other big question here, Camille, is the starting lineup. You and I have never really talked about this one much. I think we've engaged with the listeners and the commenters on this every time when it comes up, but I don't know that you and I have had this discussion. Does this starting five work? Is this what the Bucks need to continue going forward with?
I don't think so. I don't think so. I had the concerns about this starting lineup in regards to how they would be defensively, with Taurean Prince being the one who was tasked to check the other team's opposing best player most of the time. Kuz gets that assignment from time to time, but seeing it offensively as well and seeing how teams are starting to play Kyle Kuzma, where they're putting their big on Kuz and just letting him sag off. It's very Grant Williams-ish of just like, we're going to let you shoot. And in that third quarter for the Bucks against the Warriors here, like he was able to make some of those open shots. But then again, some of the shot selections, like he had a couple of heat checks, he's doing sidestep threes, and it's like, those we need to get those out of here. Like, I don't have a
first
problem.
heat check three, I don't have a problem with. I'm not
Yeah, but the second one,
I think you don't either. Yeah, it's just
like,
what we saw after that.
Like,
Kyle
no,
Kuzma was 3 of 7 on threes in that third quarter.
yeah. And I think, like, I would say 2 of them were bad threes where I'm like, God, we don't need those types in there. But if that's how teams are playing as well, like, you're going to have to use Kuzma a bit differently. Like, he can't just be a spot-up shooter because it's just going to mess up your spacing throughout. I saw someone suggest that they actually start using Giannis in the dunker a little bit more, because if you're putting the big on to Kuz and you have a small on Brook and you're doing a lot of Brook Dame pick and rolls, you're not getting an advantage because the switch is more like. So if you want to try to get Dame into an action where he's going to actually have a mismatch, or, you know, the big, you got to start screening with Kuz and Dame and then allow the work to go from there. But when you're thinking about the starting lineup here, I feel like Kuz is going to be there. There's a conversation like, should he be starting? Maybe he should be a 6-man for this team to help with that spacing. But I think if they utilize Kuz differently, you can still keep him in the starting lineup. But you have to have a shooter in there. Either that 2 guard needs to be a shooter you can respect, or someone who can also handle the ball and take some of that ball handling off of Dame along the way. I've been a proponent of like, no, don't start Kevin Porter Jr. Don't do that. I'm starting like, maybe we should see what that looks like. Or Ryan Rollins, just another guard that can be out there and handle some of the ball handling when Dame is getting pressure. Or Gary Trent Jr., just another one of those guards. Like, I think it has to be somebody out there that can help initiate the offense and help take the pressure off of Dame when he is getting pressed.
Yeah, and you know, it's funny too, in looking through some of the comments, the complaints about Brook playing on the perimeter.
You need that.
Well, you need it, and also it's happened less frequently the last few weeks. Like, we're seeing more of Brook around the basket. You need somebody to stretch the floor, especially with Giannis getting into the paint, and especially when teams are sagging off of Kyle Kuzma and just saying, fine, let him take threes. I think it's like an onion that we've kind of taken off the skin, and now there's more like, all right, we got to peel this one back. That I was with you where I initially said, I don't know about KPJ in the starting lineup. I think his value is running the offense with that second unit, but the more we're seeing teams really press and trap Damian Lillard like this, the more you have to consider, okay, do we have to put Kevin Porter Jr. out there to give somebody other than Giannis the ability to alleviate Dame and bring the ball up the floor, or have the option to do so and allow Damian Lillard to play off the ball a bit more? The Ryan Rollins suggestion, I think you're going to run into the same thing where teams are just going to say, it's shots, like, especially in the playoffs. Like, Ryan Rollins has been a pretty consistent shooter here in the regular season, and even when he comes in garbage time, I mean, it's death taxes, and Ryan Rollins is going to hit some open looks. But I just think teams are going to do that in the playoffs. To me, the more difficult and complicated conversation is the more of a data set we're starting to get here on this starting lineup. It just doesn't work. You have an offense that's in the 56th percentile with this. Nice. You've been pretty good defensively, giving up a 109.1 defensive rating, but your offense is a 115.2, which, ironically enough, that's basically your season averages, or close to it in what the Bucks are doing here. So nothing has really changed there. I think we've seen teams that have, depending on who the guy is in the backcourt, if you got a quick 2-guard or somebody that can penetrate and get into the paint, that's going to give Taurean Prince some problems, because he's a 3 that can take on some 4s as well, and you're asking him to defend 2s. the more that we see, and the more you see what Kyle Kuzma's offensive game is, and as much as I think we all wanted to assume, well, Kyle Kuzma was a pretty good catch and shoot three guy with the Lakers and a nice 3-and-D player. I mean, it was really 1 year that Kyle Kuzma had a pretty good shooting percentage, and it wasn't the year the Lakers won the title. I mean, he was just okay that year. It's the year after where he was a 36% three-point shooter. He was a 28% three-point shooter with the Wizards. He's been a 30% three-point shooter in his near 20 games with the Bucks. Like, I think we're seeing he is who he is. That's what Kyle Kuzma is as a shooter. He's a guy that has to play in transition and get into the lane. And when you have those conversations, or that understanding, I should say, well, who does that mimic? I mean, the guy that he's playing next to, which cuts down on a lot of the spacing. So I don't know if it's, I think initially we would have all said, well, just move Taurean Prince to the bench and bring in Kevin Porter Jr. or Gary Trent Jr., who frankly is probably going to play more minutes than any of those guys. So I think as much as we like Gary Trent coming off the bench, it's probably time to strongly consider putting him in the starting lineup, because I think he's been the most consistent and proven commodity that you have outside of those first 10 games. But to me, it's a strong consideration of, do we have to just play Kyle Kuzma off the bench? And especially what Doc said before the game yesterday, I mean, we only got two bigs, so we're going to see stretches where Kyle Kuzma is going to be playing the 5 for us here until Bobby Portis returns. Like, I don't know. Is this what you're working with? That maybe Kyle Kuzma is our guy that relieves Giannis, and we have that type of player on the floor at all times, where not that you eliminate it altogether, but you have limited minutes of Kyle Kuzma and Giannis sharing the floor together. The challenge with all of it is Kyle Kuzma has been your best defensive player since coming over in the trade, and that's the guy that you would love to say, okay, starting the game, whoever the tough perimeter matchup is, Kyle Kuzma's going on him.
Yeah, I mean, that's something we can definitely talk a little bit more to in tomorrow's show, just kind of digging into the lineups and the combinations that might work better for the Bucks. But for Kuz, the defense, I've mentioned, I've been pleasantly surprised with the defense from Kuz. And it was mentioned, I forget which national broadcast it was, but there was no local broadcast this game, and they mentioned that Kuz said that his conditioning levels weren't where they needed to be, coming from the Wizards, where, you know, the role was a bit different than coming here and being tasked to be the defensive stopper or just to make a lot more plays. And that's part of, I think it was the Lakers game, because that's why Kuz did not start on Luka, and they were trying to wait to use that because they just wanted to kind of save his energy a little bit going forward. But I think there's some tinkering that needs to be done with this Bucks starting lineup and just some of the rotations and how guys are being utilized even more than anything, because seeing Kuz being regulated to a spot-up shooter, that's not going to do good for anyone. That was the very first thing I said when the trade was made of, he's not a great shooter, but like there are ways you can use him where he can be beneficial to the team. So those avenues have to be explored.
Yeah, it is certainly something that warrants a larger conversation coming up in the next few days here. As look, the other point I wanted to make was, and this is by no means to say, hey, the Warriors suck, but this was there. Like, when you look at some of the games where the Bucks were handled, I was talking about this with somebody who will remain unnamed during the broadcast of, wow, this might be the worst we have looked all season. Was their suggestion. I was like, I don't know. I mean, are we really forgetting those first 10 games and that the first Knicks game, especially that Memphis Grizzlies game, the last 3 quarters of that Thunder game? Like, I don't know that I'm ready to say this game is the worst that the Bucks have looked. But their point was, look, the Thunder game, it's pretty clear the Thunder are a better team than the Bucks, and they just took it from them. The Knicks game, the way that game started, the first one where Towns was just destroying Brook Lopez, the Knicks looked like a much better team than us. The Memphis Grizzlies always give us problems, and they looked like a much better team. That was not the case with this game last night. Like, I didn't leave this game saying, man, the Warriors are just on a different level than the Bucks. They look better than them. The Warriors were not efficient. I know they were playing without Steph Curry, but this was there for you. This wasn't a, man, you just can't match up with Golden State. Like, you should have won this game for what your defense did, and that was the most frustrating part of all of this.
Yeah, this 5-game road trip, I was saying if the Bucks can go 3-2 on this road trip, like, I'll
Yeah.
consider that
Honestly, 3-2 has to be the expectation, which
yeah, I
is
was like,
now you got to win
that's a
3 of
good
your
road
next
trip.
4.
And I was being optimistic. Hey, maybe they can, turn that. Maybe we can go 4-1 on the road trip or something like that. But that feels unrealistic at this point for them to rattle off 4 wins after this performance here. But they have to start figuring it out. Like Dame mentioned that part of why he was looking forward to this road trip because of the timing of it. And it's going to be a good litmus test of kind of like just where they are right now. And the first game of the 5, not great results. The positive is that you got 4 more on this road trip. You can turn that around. If you look strong going out here, it's a different conversation, but there's a lot this team needs to clean up.
There is. We'll get into those conversations and continue to sift through them in the coming days here. Another West Coast, another late one, I should say, Thursday night, 9:30, even later, tip against the Lakers. LeBron's not going to play in that game. The Lakers are playing tonight against the Denver Nuggets. So remains to be seen. They have not been playing Luka Doncic in both sets of a back-to-back. So we'll see if Luka Doncic is out of that game too, and then you catch a massive break. If that is the case, you know how much I hate putting the label out there, but it definitely is a must-win game. If that's and even frankly without it, that the fact that it's gonna be no LeBron and you started the road trip the way you did, you have to win that game Thursday night in Los Angeles tomorrow night, because otherwise you got to win your next 3 games. You cannot have a losing road trip here, and you certainly can't have more of the same with a 1-4 road trip like we saw last year, and it seems like we've seen so many times. I just want to wrap with this too. The tiring conversations about Brook Lopez.
Yes.
I mean, it has clearly been a trigger for both of us, but this growing notion too that the Bucks are too reliant on threes and they take too many threes. The Bucks are in the middle of the pack in 3-pointers attempted, and they're the second best team in the league in converting those threes. That is not a team that is living and dying by threes. When you look at the volume of threes, there's a handful of teams taking 10 more threes a game than the Bucks are. The Celtics are taking nearly 50 a game. The Cavs are taking 5 more threes a game than the Bucks. The Bucks are nowhere near the top of the list in 3-point volume. If this was the case of Bucks are taking 50 threes a game and they're only shooting 35% on those threes, then we can have that conversation. But this team is not too reliant on threes. And if you eliminate the 3, buddy, I got news for you. If you don't like the defense you see with teams just sagging into the paint and saying, okay, good luck, Giannis, that's going to triple if you just say, well, no more threes for this team.
It is. I could go on a Brook Lopez rant, but I won't, because there's certain things I agree with. Like, Brook Lopez does not need to be playing 35 minutes a game. Doesn't need to be playing that many minutes. I can definitely agree with that. But they've been using Brook differently over the last few weeks. Like, he has been rolling a lot more. He has been finishing inside a lot more. But you have to continue to utilize the fact that he is a stretch big to keep the spacing on the floor for some of the non-shooters that he tends to be playing around. Like, it's a delicate balance. And defensively for him, we know that if it's a matchup where he has a stretch big, it's going to be a bit more difficult for him because you don't want Brook on the perimeter. So I'm not saying that Brook is a perfect player. He has certain flaws, but when it comes to his offense, like, that's been the most consistent part for him over the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, I mean, frankly, I think at this point you need to see more 3-point shots
Yeah.
from Brook. And look, you need to see, and we're going way over now, but you need to see more than 2 3-point attempts from AJ Green. Like, he's clearly been in a struggle. As I mentioned, the shooting splits are not dramatically different, but he needs more than 2 3-point attempts. So that's the other big thing is when we talk about, I would say threes have been a problem for this team, that they're not taking enough of them of late. And you need to start to see those go through the net. So a lot of that we'll get into coming up on our show for tomorrow. And of course, the recap of the Lakers game where we hope for much, much better things. That'll do it for today's show. For Camille, I'm Justin. We'll talk with you guys once again tomorrow on Locked On Bucks.